Is my mirror, Parivar, also reversed, or is it good? Okay. I guess it's just what I see in the mirror of myself, my reflection, my soul. I hope everyone's got some water and coffee by you.
Wait, is Google sending us coffee? I didn't really get it.
Google doesn't make coffee yet.
What? Oh, Google.
All right. We can go and get started, Manish, or you want to wait for a few minutes?
I think let's go ahead and get started.
Awesome.
I think we're pretty good to go.
Fantastic. Well, good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Hello, everyone. Happy Transgender Awareness Week. My name is Anjali Remy, pronouns she, her, they, them. I am with Parivar Bay Area, and I couldn't be more excited, elated, and grateful to have a fabulous set of community leaders, activists, motivators, visionaries join me in this very important conversation around transgender awareness with a South Asian perspective. I'm joined today by Feroza Syed, who is a fantastic trans activist based out of Atlanta, and also joined by Lana Patel, who is a Indo-Caribbean trans activist and community organizer based out of Southern California, LA. Also joined by Cheryl Lala Chavez, who does great DEI work right here in the San Francisco Bay Area and has a Caribbean background and has unique experiences to share with us. And followed by Jay Jha, who is a gender non-binary asylee that has done incredible things in their time and for the diaspora. And last but not least, Raj Rao, who has been part of Parivar Bay Area and has helped us forward our commitment, but also in his own way is coming onto this journey of becoming part of the community. Can you believe that? So we will all be sharing amazing things. If any of you want to say a quick hello, feel free to do so. If you want to share your pronouns, that would be amazing. And welcome, everyone.
Hello, namaste, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. My name is Jay. I go by all pronouns. Thank you so much for joining us in this important conversation. Hopefully, it's as enjoyable to you as it is for us. Thank you.
Hi, guys. My name is Feroza Syed, and I use she, her pronouns. Thank you for joining us today. Looking forward to this conversation.
Hi, I'm Raj Rao, pronouns he, him, and thank you so much for attending today. Look forward to the discussion.
Hi, everyone. My name is Cheryl Lala Chavez, pronouns she and her, and just looking forward to the discussion. Thank you so much for having us.
Hi, everyone. Lana Patel here. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am honored to be a part of this discussion. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. I think we got everybody to just say hello, and we see more folks joining. Welcome again. This is Transgender Awareness Discussion with the South Asian Perspective. As you join, feel free to listen in. Please mute yourself, turn off your cameras, and there will be a 45-minute conversation that will be engaging, and then we will do our best to answer any questions you have, so feel free to send them our way. So, as a trans woman of color, I'm 41 years old, and I'm very proud of it. The movement of South Asian queer trans liberation seems to be, just now taking flight, just now getting visibility. and our commitment and mission at Parivar Bay Area is to celebrate that South Asian intersectionality of queer and trans folks and build a community of light, love, and acceptance. And we were able to do that with support of many, many socially responsible entities such as Google that came forward when we had the second wave hit India, other places like Guyana globally, and even in the Americas, in the South San Francisco Bay Area, and support us. So what really inspires each one of you to join this movement that might sound or look like it's relatively new in the sphere of social justice and be part of this discussion of trans awareness to provide your South Asian perspective? I would love to hear from Cheryl, if you can enlighten there.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Anjali. I think what's important for me around this discussion is that just the intersectionality. I haven't seen this intersectionality exist before. And as a South Asian queer person, I always felt in my upbringing and when I was coming out that I was like the only person. I was the only one that was coming out. It was really just othered in that sense. And so when I see, the intersectionality of South Asian and trans awareness, it's really important to me and the intersections that I hold. One such that I'm really proud of is that I'm a parent, and as a queer parent, I have gender diverse children, and I want to know and see that this awareness is coming now and is coming in the future as well for my children as they are growing up in this world, and that they will be safe and affirmed and supported. And so that's why this discussion is really important to me with both the South Asian context and trans awareness.
Thank you very much, Cheryl. Feroz, I would love to get your take there.
I am a 40-year-old trans woman, just like you, Remy. So come from the old school, but I agree with you that we're seeing a new, energized kind of liberation happening in the trans community in general right now. But more specifically, starting to see people who look like us, who've had our experiences, centering. We were seeing people come out, famous LGBTQ comedians, so it's a new realm. I think that the fight itself has always been there, right? What I'm loving about where we're at right now is that I feel like there's a community that I've never had before. And it doesn't feel like Cheryl was saying, it always used to feel like we were always alone in our struggles or our fights. But I think that some of what's happened with social media has been really, really amazing. Some things I'm not a huge fan of, but one of the things that I'm a very big fan of is how I feel like there's this interconnectivity between communities. If you were to ask me why I think that I was a little bit more out, I think that when Trump came to power in 2016, I feel like for me personally, I took in a lot of what was happening. And as again, Cheryl just said, intersections. I'm Muslim, I'm brown, I'm a woman, I'm trans, a daughter of Indian immigrants. So all of those different things were under attack at that moment. And I think that, with all these horrible negatives that came out of him, one of the positives that came out for community was that we saw a lot of fighters come out swinging and, making sure that they were utilizing their voice to help community.
Thank you for that powerful answer. Yes, community and healing and coming together and then being powerfully seen. Thank you. When we talk about building a community, we are all strangers from a different shore. And we are trying to walk into spaces, not just as South Asians or not just purely as queer or trans, but for all of it. So, there is an aspect that you often hear, or I often hear when folks say, your culture and your heritage and your history is very inclusive of trans and queer people. Though we know that the laws that rule this world are still far away from being trans inclusive, especially in the global South. India in itself has only recently started to become more trans centering and trans inclusive in their programs. So what are the elements of the South Asian diaspora that you believe or you have seen that could be brought back, that could be rejuvenated, that could be redefined, that can truly help us save South Asian trans lives around the globe? Let me start with Lana on this one.
Thank you. I think back on like the diaspora and how a lot of Indo-Caribbeans got to where they are. And I think of like where culturally a lot of Caribbeans are. And to kind of pivot off of what Feroza was saying, a reason for my coming out back in 2017 globally on social media was the fact that we needed a face and we needed a voice for Indo-Caribbeans who were navigating a trans identity. And I believe, like, historically, yes, we came from a land of people that were accepting and embracing of a third gender or identities outside of, male or female. However, with colonization, with folks migrating over different lands and being in the Caribbean, there was a sense of deep-rooted misogyny, homophobia, transphobia that was embedded in the people in the Caribbean. And that was something that I grew up with as a child of immigrants who came to this country in the 70s. For me, I feared what my existence would look like coming out and knowing that I identified as a trans woman. And so the work that I do is centered around the liberation that needs to happen for trans folks. And it was important for me to start by putting myself out there and letting folks know that there are trans identified folks in the Caribbean who need to be centered, and we need to have our time of reckoning and liberation.
Thank you, Lana. You so beautifully put that. You know, the Komaga tomorrow, if wasn't sent out, displacing us, perhaps we could have all been able to fight any transphobia or homophobia that came along the ages. But the one thing you also display so beautifully is how you have broken those barriers and you have transcended those. You know, as an immigrant myself, I came running from India about 20 years ago, and I couldn't live in this country. I had to go to Canada, then come back. So it's the journey of all of our lives that we have to do this. And in between all of this, there's this division of what South Asian means. So at Parivar, we're really very intentional in redefining South Asian. South Asian is not equal to Indian. There might be many ideologies out there, but South Asian is the entirety of the diaspora. There's no other group that is kind of associated with the region in the world, but that doesn't mean that we come from that region in the world. We have South Asians across. And then when you have to transcend that with your queer trans identity, it's a whole different dynamic that plays into it. So I'd love to hear from Raj as to how you think those dynamics have played into, and why, as a cis, I don't want to say welcome to the community. First of all, let me say that, because you have powerfully just started to share your story as a cis gay man. Well, let me ask you, in the culture, why would you see that we need to care and look past all these ideological differences to truly center trans, hijra, Kinner, Kwajasara lives within the diaspora and beyond?
Thank you for having me on the panel. And you know, the first I was start off by saying is, you know, Lana really kind of laid out sort of, we have a heritage of inclusion, of gender fluidity, of a wide spectrum of human existence. And, you know, I think one of the things, you know, I grew up in the United States, born and raised primarily in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And, you know, none of these things really filtered down to me. You know, I would say that most of the community, you know, which was essentially what, like 20 to 100 families at different points over the years, we generally, my impression was generally we tended to reflect whatever the mainstream American public opinion was at the time. And we didn't really have sort of, from our cultures, whether it's our religious traditions cultural traditions, folk traditions, we didn't have any responses, either for or against, either, a message for inclusion or a message, or a negative message. And so in that sense, it's good that we didn't have the negative message necessarily, at least in my case. Not all cases are like that, but we didn't have a positive message. And so I think, one of the things, and especially, right now when there's so much more awareness and we start seeing, whether it's in our communities over here in the United States or, in India, where we are sort of taking some first steps to really kind of affirming, all of our people, to affirming, the rights and dignity of trans people, of queer people, of LGBT people, lesbians, gays. I think we want to make sure that we don't sort of leave it at that and make that a very superficial type of, acknowledgement. Just because someone wins a high civilian honor in India who happens to be trans and can give the president of India a blessing, that doesn't mean that India has always been a trans utopia. Just because our traditions, our folk traditions, religious traditions might say, oh, there is a third gender, there is, space for you, you are not a deviant or something like that. That doesn't mean that translates into, equitable treatment on a day-to-day basis. You could still have people who believe that there is a third gender and it's affirmed in our tradition, yet they still can disown their children. And so I think, we have to always, in these cases, look at both looking at what we can draw from, to affirm our identities and affirm our rights and affirm our dignity, but at the same time translating that into like concrete policy steps, as well as, in our day-to-day lives, how do we actually stand up and show that we are proud to have all the members of our community, especially our queer and trans community.
Thank you, Raj. Acknowledgement, that's the word I see you share with all of that. And Feroz, I'd love to get your take here.
I think that just like Raj was saying, and Lana was saying, colonization is the key issue here. And I think that decolonizing, what we've learned, I mean, again, when we look back historically in, Indian culture or South Asian culture, trans and Hijra folks have been considered, in a high light prior to colonization, right? So I think what we're looking at now is learning how to deconstruct the damage that was caused and has continued to be caused to our community and every other community in the world by, cis white people coming in effectively and colonizing spaces. So I think that work it's much more simple to say that we'd like to decolonize than it is to actually do that work and sitting in those spaces and figuring out, what we're doing as a society or as a community that, is trying to align, I think, with Western values more so than with our own. When I look at my own family, it's not just in when it comes to trans issues, right? There's everyday aspects of being South Asian here that, you need to wear these kinds of clothes. You need to listen to this kind of music. You need to be this kind of person. Well, I can be both, right? At the same time. And I think that, as I've grown in my space and learn to love myself more, one of the things that I've really learned how to do is really unapologetically embrace my identity. And that's partly my Desi identity, partly my trans identity, and partly being a woman. But I think that what we're looking at right now is kind of an awakening, but people really need to spend that time identifying, what parts of themselves, they need to kind of work on. And then as a community, I think that's something that we need to learn how to, work on. Not our TGNC or LGBTQ plus community. I mean, there's still obviously issues within our communities, but I mean, as a whole, the diaspora, I think that we're all navigating what this looks like, 50, 60 years into where we're at now.
Thank you, Firoza, for that. Those powerful words. You nailed it. As a community, we need to work together. The South Asian diaspora is the second richest ethnic group in America. But trigger warning, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. For a third year in a row, India, which is one of the largest countries in the diaspora, ranks in the top 5 of trans murders and deaths as per the records that have been maintained. So this insensitivity from the greater South Asian diaspora has to change. We probably have to get a refresher. We probably have to dispel a whole lot of things. And you brought up something about us attesting more to the Western values and cultures. Well, I, as a removed trans person from India, have only recently learned that there's really no word to translate trans into any of the languages within the South Asian diaspora. There's Kinnar, there's Hijra, there's Khwajasara, there's Koti, there's Arvani, there's Shiv Shaktis, there's Jogi Appas, Nupi Mambias, there's Mangalmukhis, there's Tirungal. There's so many identities, and each one of us is attached to a cultural heritage as well. And another aspect that I want to bring into this is the ability to have access to be on a gender journey. I consider myself to be one of the very few fortunate trans women who has been able to come away, and at a time when, trigger warning, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, it was okay to throw stones at me, to sexually abuse me and throw me in the sewer to be dead. We've come long ways from that. But also the reality is the trans elders that we have seen through Parivar, especially during the height of the pandemic, when they came out of the woodworks, had never accessed. So, for example, we have a 66-year-old trans woman who dresses as what is considered male clothing and has to exist that way, and has been denied opportunities because she is what people refer as pant shirt koti. So she's trans, but she has not been able to access. So even the gender non-binary existence is something that only further adds complexity to us taking the next breath. So Jay, what is it to be non-binary in this diaspora that you very much so love, and I love what you're wearing? And what is the true manifesto of the non-binary there, and how does it really apply to your intersectional existence?
Thank you, Remy. Thank you so much. And I applaud my costumer for this. Thank you, Remy. The manifesto. I think the manifesto of being non-binary is to abolish the gender structures that exist on this planet. The idea of transition is applaudable. People should definitely choose the journey they want in identifying what their gender is. But there's a larger question here. The question is, why do we need gender to define our existence? Why does it have to follow immediately after our name to tell people who we are? It's nobody's business. And also, it is so unclear in everybody's mind what that word is. Words itself are so disabling. The idea, what is he? What is she? What is masculine? What is feminine? What is third gender? In this room itself, we will have probably 5,000 interpretations of that word. And here we are as a society putting structures that imprison us to tell us what should and should not be. And those structures are basically based on fear. It's all a lot of fear. Don't do this because people will tell you that. Don't do that because you're not looking like this. So that whole aspect of policing us in our most intimate, personal existence, that needs to be abolished completely and continuously. That's the manifesto of being non-binary. Even if our scriptures, if you look at the Hindu scriptures, Krishna took so many forms. Krishna and Mohini is a really big sort of like aspect of Krishna's avatars, the way he took it. But that's still binary. That's still masculine to feminine. There are no stories. There are no people who can actually tell you that it doesn't matter what spectrum you are. Live who you are, figure out your journey. And before you know, you're dead. You don't even know when that life is taken away. And you were struggling with questions which have no relevance to your journey, but you continue to uplift what your grandparents said, what your cousin said, what your neighbor is saying, and what this whole society and political constitution now, at least in America, where they're trying to invade all the trans freedoms that have been so hard fought, even in America. So that is the manifesto. Abolish gender. Gender is not important. Gender is useless. Gender does not tell you anything about you. So that's the manifesto. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jay. And you powerfully depicted that in your one-person show, Mahabharata, where you dispelled all the cisness that prevailed and talked actually about the gender fluidity that truly weaved the story together. And we can't wait for it to come back again in production. Anyone else who wants to chime on that? Go ahead, Farisa.
I'd just like to say that often within the TGNC community, this is an issue that comes up often, where we find that non-binary, gender fluid, and gender non-conforming folks feel like they're being othered within the community. And I agree 100% with you that gendered, identify how you identify, but by breaking down the binary, again, as a trans woman who identifies female, or on that binary spectrum, there's no harm, no foul. Actually, it uplifts all of us by breaking down these norms of what is and isn't, a particular person, because then you have the freedom to identify how you want on that spectrum. And sometimes within community, we have folks who say, well, I transitioned, or I do feel this way and feel hurt, but I would like to just, again, reiterate your point that agreed 100% that, gender is just a label and it really doesn't mean anything specifically to who you are and your identity as a person. And you can be transgender and binary and transition, but still be for that abolishment of gender as a whole. Because I think that I would have struggled a lot less in my youth when I was transitioning, when I was going through what I was going through, had I had a little bit more freedom to feel like, oh, I am feminine. Okay, this is fine, because when you're breaking down that binary, if you're not breaking it down, what you're doing is saying that one person can, you cannot be, male or female. And a lot of people within community don't understand that the struggle is exactly the same. And by supporting the gender non-fluid, non-binary community, the trans community in and of itself is working towards liberation. Sorry.
Thank you, Feroza. Again, so well put and beautiful complimentary of what Jay was sharing. One thing you brought up was around that understanding each other, because each of our journeys is so unique. None of us in the room have the same living experience. So you just take that to the next level when you're queer trans, and then you add an intersectional identity as a South Asian diaspora. So I think it begins with having that allyship right within the communities. I walked into spaces where I was told, you're too female presenting, we cannot give you access to hormones. Well, I'm trying to become what is called a female. That was 22 years ago. And I still hear those stories, because I think we all have to understand equity, and that the South Asian queer trans movement has had a lot of cisness that has been centered and masculinity that has forwarded the movement. We're grateful for that. But at this point, how do we really center and bring about the existence of each one of us in a powerful way? Like each one of us is able to get space and share your story. Because at Parivar, it's also important for us to help and commit ourselves to saving South Asian trans lives. And that is what we did. That is what we did despite all the struggles that we faced, being the grassroots organization, less than 3 years old, running the largest pan-India relief and now rehabilitation initiative across all these constructs of regions, lockdowns, religions, languages, to only come back to the fact that we're a very critical mass. Each one of you existing is being part of that critical mass. We have to fight the social injustices. We have to fight the xenophobia, the Islamophobia, the anti-Blackness, the Asian hate. We have to fight all of that. But do we have the right words to explain all this to our people in the diaspora? Because a whole lot of us in the South Asian diaspora are educated. We are at a company that probably has a whole lot of techie people, if I'm saying that right, who are educated, who are from the South Asian diaspora, first generation, or from their homelands. How do we bring them in? How do we, talk about it? One way I have had to do or resort to, and maybe not the most healthiest, is the calling out to call in. I'm calling out to call you in because the time is so limited. The need of the hour is to get that oxygen cylinder. The need of the hour is to make sure that a Kajal who lives right in the Bay Area is not homeless and we can pay her rent. We can convince her paying guest owner that she will be able to pay rent. So what are other ways that we can actually activate, engage, and bring the South Asian diaspora to be part of it? And do you have any times that you can share of your actions that actually help build this trans awareness with the community, with the diaspora? I'll start with you, Lana, there.
Thank you. I think it's important that we do call folks out, right? And that we do bring people in. And I think for me, it was deconstructing weapons of oppression and misogyny and homophobia within my cultures and within my family first, and then moving out into community. And so for me personally, I remember growing up, my mother is Afro-Indo-Jamaican. My father's Afro-Indo-Trinidadian. And we grew up with dance hall music. And we had very homophobic music within dance hall. And they spoke very ill of queer folks. And I remember growing up with a Jamaican stepfather who basically told me that being a LGBTQ person was a sin, was a bad thing, and that he was trying to protect my brother and I from that. And I was just constantly being fed, whether it was through media or through like family gatherings, talking, stories, that my identity as a LGBTQ person was just not acceptable. And so for me, being the first out trans LGBTQ person in my family led for a liberation in different ways. My younger sister came out as lesbian, and she's in a position where she can openly identify. And I look back on like the 20-year struggle, because I came out in 2001 to my family, and we had a long journey to get to this point for me to finally be like in a place where I'm open, I'm fully embraced and accepted. My little sister can now come out as a lesbian. She can bring her girlfriend to my parents' home. But it does come from us calling out folks so that we can then call them in. And sometimes we need to give them a mirror so they can see their own prejudice and see the ignorance. And I think for my family, it took trigger warning. It took me being out and open about my suicidal ideation for them to understand the severity of what they were doing and how they meant well by forcing me to live a cis male het existence to, become successful in my education and my career and let go of my identity as a trans person out of safety, but also out of the optics and what that looks like for them. Once they understood the severity of what that was called, like the pain that it was causing me internally to have to live a lie in an existence that did not sit right with me, for them to finally come around and say, you know what, we accept you, we embrace you. And it took some time even then, but I think it's important that we really do start at home. We have these conversations at home, and then we go out into community, and then we also seek community. And I got to experience something very beautiful I was in New York for a month. Was born and raised in New York. I left New York when I was 13 years old to live with my mother's parents. And in my adult life, I didn't spend much time. What will people say? Yes, right? And I think that has just been the running theme. What are other people saying? Everyone's worried about other people, but not worried about what's happening in the home and how it is affecting the person that is going through it. And I think that was the plight for me and so many of us. We've had to worry about other people while we neglected ourselves, and it created harm within ourselves because we had to deny ourselves our truth and our existence. And so I think for me, what was very beautiful 20 years later, going back home, having a bit of a homecoming, finally being out, and open with my family, being embraced, my sister being queer, her bringing her girlfriend home, my parents being accepting, and getting to connect with community. I got to connect with the Caribbean Equality Project over in New York, and Muhammad and all the amazing folks over there. They were incredible, and it was so nice to be with other queer Caribbean folks and to meet an Indo-Caribbean person and to like be able to call in after calling out for so long. I finally felt seen and heard, and I felt like I was part of a collective. And I think it's important for us to have those spaces to continuously call out the injustice that we see so that we can call them in and, create a collective.
Thank you, Lana. What a powerful journey, and crisscrossing the whole country. You have inspired a whole lot of us. You know that. Thank you. Raj, there's a flip side of this, and that is, what are things that we can tell our community, our diaspora, and beyond? Because it's not that we can exist in isolation just within the South Asian diaspora. We all have to be part of the greater liberation, the collective liberation that's so important. But what do you see as some of those aspects or insensitivities that could be addressed quickly so we can have greater allyship and greater community?
It's an interesting question that you ask this, because I would say that, especially where and when I grew up, I would hear insensitive comments, from various aspects of the community. In fact, when I went to college, some of my first direct experiences with someone saying something homophobic to me or having a problem with my existence were from other diaspora people my age. And, it was a lot of, the no homo bro, like those types of things, like, oh, it's gross. And, for me, what that ended up doing was it made me feel that I would rather avoid my community as much as I can, which is something that I was able and equipped to do because, I grew up in this country. Culturally speaking, like, I am very consistent with other Americans of my age group and socioeconomic background. And so that was a feasible option for me. And it's an option I chose. And what ended up happening is it's only until maybe really recently, like 5 to 10 years ago, that I even was comfortable talking to another South Asian person and not hiding who I was. It had nothing to do with what they said, but it's like the insensitivity a lot of time manifests as, no statement of support or some offhand comment. And, within this sort of realm of ambiguity where we don't talk about gender and sexuality that much, every little statement that you say, if you have a queer person, a trans person, in your household, they're probably listening very carefully to the things you're saying. And when you say something, when you make a little offhand comment, based on a news story, that'll be internalized because that's what happened to me. And so I think, when we talk about the insensitivities, I think it's, being able to show that you're not ashamed to have a transgender, gender nonconforming, gay, lesbian child, a family member, colleague, being able to stand with them. And, there's, I saw a comment in there talking about what will people think, the log kya kahenge type of attitude. And I think that is one of the biggest insensitivities out there. So if you disarm that and say that you are proud and you affirm, and it's not despite that they are queer, transgender, nonconforming, LGBT, but because of their whole existence, that you appreciated and you were proud to have them in part of your family.
Raj, 3 years ago, I think you walked up to me at an event that Parivar was doing. We've done many events, and I honestly, respecting your, identity, you didn't disclose to me, and I thought you were a true ally. From that to now being part of Parivar Bay Area's board and being our chief spokesperson, like, what really do you think made you do that? I mean, you're almost like the Carl Penn of our diaspora, or because if anybody says to me, "Oh, the South Asian gay lesbian struggle is good," that might be the case for the rest. The disparity, the wealth, all that is true, but it's still very difficult for all of us to exist as queer trans people within the diaspora. And I keep coming back to that because that is the reality. So what really brought you from that to where you are today? And thank you for all you do.
Well, first and foremost, I'd say it's you, because I think you're an inspiration. I've never met anyone who works so hard to make really concrete contributions to a global community. And it's not just in the Bay Area. It is also being able to, at the height of the Delta variant second wave in India, being able to mobilize such a huge logistical operation to thousands of people across the country. So I think first of all, credit goes to you. And I think for me, like, community is very important. And anyone who is willing to actually do the work and to make concrete contributions is someone I want to support. And I think the other thing is it's been an interesting journey, because I went from sort of like the other panelists have talked about, thinking that I was the only one and feeling very isolated, a lot of times having to sort of find other communities that I can sort of somewhat tangentially or more substantively relate to, within the isolation that I had. To suddenly say in a post-Obergefell America, where now it's like, okay, the gay people are all equal now, like, they've just risen up in sort of the power hierarchy. And in a lot of cases, that's true, as you point out. I mean, there's a male privilege, there is education achievement, there is how you're treated on the job. But I think what, kind of really inspired me, first of all, was there is an overlap of relatability of the struggles. And I think it's important to acknowledge that overlap, as well as respect the really concrete differences that can exist. So for example, understanding that, yeah, I had maybe the ability to sort of pretend or blend in to the population. I think a lot of times what ended up happening is the Indian kind of overshadowed the gay, so people would just see the Indian first and then forget about the rest. But I think when I would see the stories of a lot of the trans warriors in India as well as here, where I remember one story I saw where there was an auto rickshaw driver or taxi driver, and she had been kicked out of her home, had undergone all sorts of challenges, living on her own, isolated without any family, and then to see her go back to her family and to still support her parents, to take care of them in sickness, and to even go back and support the community that had treated her so horribly. And to me, that just, I really related to it, because it's like, even though that's not been my experience, I can definitely empathize with sort of like, on one hand, you're facing all of this stuff from the community, but at the same time, they're still your family, they're still your relatives, and you still care about them, and you still have some sort of ingrained sense of obligation towards them. And I think that's something that is a very, something across South Asia. I think that is something culturally a lot of us have. And I think, that, really inspired me to kind of make more of a contribution.
Thank you for that, Raj. And you absolutely have been contributing, and we appreciate that. And the struggle continues, but the work needs to happen. And we saw that, and we stepped up and needing to do that, because there were very few places that was really talking about vaccine equity, healthcare equity, economic equity. And we are about defining that at Parivar. It is not about raising $20 and giving it to the trans queer person and be well. It's about helping them have sustainable livelihoods and restore dignity in this community. But community is not just us. We have to transcend beyond that. We have to build partnerships and allyships, which is very important and critical for us at Parivar Bay Area, because It's about the South Asian queer trans education, awareness, and inclusion through meaningful partnerships. So Cheryl, if I came to you and asked you, how do you translate that in a non-South Asian spaces? You do a lot of DEI work, you're working with other LGBT organizations and your household, you have a non-South Asian partner, kids. What's the language look like that for something around that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, it's just being inclusive of all the different cultures that we have within our household too. And just kind of talking about, my partner is from Mexico, Mexican heritage, and just really understanding what is important for them. And then also what is important for me and my South Asian identity. I think as Raj was saying, I'm relatively new and really claiming my South Asian identity because of a lot of family rejection. And so what is really important for me is chosen family, not necessarily blood family, because, at family gatherings, even to this day, if I was to go to a family gathering, which I try to avoid blood family gathering as much as possible, they'll say like, when are you going to get married, Cheryl? And I've been married with my partner for the last 10 years and we have 2 children, and, they just don't see it. They don't see it at all. They just don't think that it's within, their purview that I am a married woman with children. Like, they don't recognize my family at all. And so it's really important for me to go out and make connections, with other South Asians as chosen family, and to be able to talk about some of the things in my story that has kept me relatively isolated from my own kind of blood family, and really being inclusive to, this is not just my struggle as a South Asian person. I've seen this struggle with my partner as well and their Latinx heritage as well.
Thank you. Weaving that community together. I recently wrote an op-ed that's published in American Kahani celebrating trans lives. We are taking steps in the right direction with miles to go or kilometers to go, wherever you're sitting. So how do we do that, Feroza, while still also addressing the inequities around religion, nationality, creed, caste, language, immigration, while also making sure that trans queer people are still being protected in the struggle for Parivar, as you have been one of the biggest champions of our organization. We are so grateful. And me personally, like, your story is so inspirational, and I'm so grateful to have you as my sister for eternity. How do we balance that? Our struggle has been to answer that question. Do we take support from those that show up because they are genuinely here to support trans folks? Or is there a vetting process? Or is there, it's going to come? One of the podcasts I did recently, I said, you can always have us activate because we're looking for a place to belong. We're looking for a place to belong. So we will come, stand at the rallies and the protests, and we will fight alongside with you. But then when is our turn for you to show up for our home community? So what's your take on that?
So that's a very complicated kind of question. So I'll start off with where I think what we can do within community first, and then maybe talk about allyship. So for me, I always call it baby steps, right? As Lana was mentioning, as Raj has mentioned, I mean, Jay, everybody I think on this call has talked about either Lok Gakahenge, our families, where they were often 20-year kind of turnaround periods, right, of our families. It's important to remember that, you can't break down this misogyny, this patriarchy, this colonization, and all the different things that are happening in this diaspora in a matter of 6 months. It's just not going to happen, right? You can't do it with your family. You can't do it with the community. It's going to take some long-term work. And for me, one of the biggest things that we have to do is make sure that as we're taking those baby steps, that yes, we are standing up for ourselves. Yes, that we are making sure that we are putting down hard boundaries of what is and isn't acceptable, but also not othering or shaming the folks who are trying to learn. For example, one of the big things that for me within my own internal family has been me learning to love myself enough to not allow where they're at to affect me to the level it used to, if that makes sense. And what that's done for me has been given me the ability to be able to have conversations that were often very uncomfortable for me, like Raj was saying too, right? Where it kind of pulls you, into this triggering space. And what's happened in this situation is that finally in the last 5 years, and I'm 40, I transitioned when I was 18, 19 years old, is that my family has finally come to a space where now that they know there's no power left there, and then there's also not that coming out from this emotional kind of, triggered space when we're having these conversations, that we can actually have some more in-depth conversations and do that. But that goes along outside of just your family. For example, as an activist or an advocate, people are often like, Feroza, how are you going back and forth with this person who voted for Trump, or is, being a little bit negative on your Facebook? And the funny thing is, I've probably defriended over the last, 5 years, maybe a whopping like 6 people. And it was just because it was like that obnoxious, right? They were very vile. But otherwise, what I've learned is that when we keep ourselves in our bubbles, or that we keep ourselves in comfortable circles where we're not talking to folks, right? That people can't really come to the light if we're not calling them in. And how are we doing that, right? So making sure that as we're stepping out into these circles and speaking and going out beyond our community or within our diaspora, that we're not othering the folks that don't really have the knowledge. You can't, I often tell people that, fear is based in ignorance, and, hatred is based in fear, right? So if you want to conquer that hatred of the trans community, you have to conquer that ignorance, right? And you can't conquer that ignorance by being shut off. So my biggest thing I would say is baby steps there. As far as, when we're talking about, if you're talking about corporate allies, Remy, or people like that who are like, we give and give and give and give, but then what are we getting back? I think that knowing your worth and accepting, term on your own terms. And what I've been learning as an activist and advocate, for me, at least for the, the last 3 years, is when to say yes, when to say no, when a partnership works for me and is mutually beneficial. And when it's benefiting my community, if it's not benefiting me, right? So finding spaces in which we're navigating this, because as we can all probably agree on this call, the key word now is being trans or being queer and LGBTQ, and it's kind of become, a hit word, right? In the sense that like everybody's looking to have us on panels or work with us, but finding spaces in which we can utilize that to the benefit of the community, and not just to the benefit of that company. I'm tired of being the trans woman of color on the panel, right? And solely to be there to educate, it has to be something, a little bit of give and take, right? And then also asking for our worth. When we're speaking outside of our community and we are doing these events, or we're going out and doing D&I panels, as Cheryl probably does, and I do, speaking with Georgia Power, Coca-Cola, Delta, making sure that we're asking for what our worth is, because we want to make sure that the community members who are coming behind us, the younger queer, non-binary folk, trans folk, and babies are also capable of getting that money and making sure that they're getting per diems and speaking fees and other things like that. So by asking for that on the front end, we are making sure that our community behind us is being taken care of, because it's no longer assumed that that work is going to be done for free. Did I cover all of that?
Absolutely, brilliantly. It's reliving our traumas and sharing our experiences is not a token of our being grateful to be in these spaces. In fact, it's the other way around. We are putting our vulnerability on the line to educate and walk into these uncharted territories. And one of the pieces of this puzzle is to really look around and understand that each one of us has privilege. And as a diaspora, South Asians have a lot of privilege. 91% trigger warning, 54321, of trans people murdered in this country, since records were kept since 2015, have been Black trans women. And globally, 70% of the folks that we've been lost have been from the global South, especially South America. So, looking to you, Lana, to help us here is, as a person who also exists as a biracial person, how can the anti-Blackness be addressed within the South Asian queer trans community obviously the greater South Asian trans diaspora, because fundamentally, we at Parivar and I have believed that if we can uplift the Black trans identity, we're going to uplift the entirety of our struggle. There's no questions or qualms to be asked, to be discussed around that aspect. But how do we really do that?
That was okay. Sorry, let me move my stand. That was a loaded question, and the energy was calling for a move and a shift. So I will say that it comes down to us really deconstructing anti-Blackness and understanding what that is and what that looks like, right? And it's a deeper conversation, and it's a deeper work, right? It stems from us segregating ourselves into different caste systems. It stems from us segregating ourselves into featureism, right? Xenophobia and colorism, and like who's more fair, who's more dark, who I'm going to associate with, talks of hair texture, kinky hair, silky hair, right? There's a lot of like xenophobia that's like based within that. And then it is also us deconstructing what Blackness is and what anti-Blackness is, right? And I think a lot of people come to this country and are taught what Black people are through media and through very like ignorant sources. And so they then tell their children, stay away from Black people, or Black people are bad, right? And then those kids grow up to have these biases. We need to really understand why that is in place and how that divide was used to separate us, to create this hierarchy where Black people are at the bottom and have had to exist within like the totem, the bottom of the totem pole. And it's something that I've even witnessed within the Caribbean, right? When South Asians were brought over as indentured servants, there was a lot of conversation of Indian people are bad, the Black people are bad. So to create a divide between Africans and Indians so that they would not come together, so that they would not ban against the colonizer. And I see it happening here in the United States. And I think it took the Black Lives Matter movement back in 2020 to finally happen, for us to finally shine a light on what has been going on for ages. You know, my grandmother coming to this country right after JFK was assassinated, trigger warning, sorry, JFK and Martin Luther King, right? And for her to be a biracial woman married to an Indian man, to come into this country when, you know, immigration laws were finally put in place for folks to come to America, but also seeing someone like MLK be persecuted in this country, I think it still trickles down in 2021, where we're still having to deal with anti-Black sentiments. And I think within the queer community, it really does come down to us moving away from silencing Black folks and only using them when it benefits us, and only looking for tokens and trying to find ways in which we find acceptable, quote unquote, Black folks that speak a certain way, that have a certain amount of education, that have a certain look to them that we feel that is appeasing to our palate, and really understanding the root of the problem. And it really does break down to colonization. And we need to really understand the fact that due to colonization, we are where we are now. So I think it is us really just calling each other in, breaking down those barriers, having these conversations, really breaking bread with community, and not seeing them as other or the enemy, because we're all in this together. And until, like Marsha P. Johnson said, right, until Black folks, until queer folks are liberated, we're all in this fight together. Like the fight does not end until we all get our liberation. So it honestly does start with the Black community, who have been marginalized since they were brought over to this country with against their will and made to build this country up to where it is, where a lot of non-Black folks have had the liberty to skirt around a model minority privilege off of the labor and a lot of the pain and injustice that's been placed on Black folks. So I think it really does break down to us decolonizing that experience and really working together with the Black community to uplift folks so that we all are liberated.
Thank you so much, Lana. I really appreciate you taking the labor of answering that. And sorry if I threw that question at you without.
No, I appreciate it.
But we are almost at time, but I do want to make sure that I acknowledge the wonderful panelists who joined us. Thank you, Google, for helping us create a platform to bring our voices forward. I would like to take 2 more minutes of your time real quick to get 3 words, powerful words out of you of what it means to build our South Asian queer trans family. At Parivar Bay Area, that is what we strive to do every single day. What are those 3 words that you would like to put in these building blocks? Let's start with Raj.
I guess I would say love, embracing, and celebrating. And when I say embracing, what I mean by that is a lot of times family members, we can drive each other nuts. We can have different, experiences, different preferences, different, perspectives, but we accept them and we embrace it because there is love in there.
Thank you. Jay?
I'm going to use the words of Mariam Kaba, who is a prison abolitionist, the discipline of hope.
Discipline of hope, powerful. Cheryl?
I will say unconditional love. I feel like there should be no conditions to the love. And so unconditional love and acceptance.
Unconditional love and acceptance. Feroza?
I'm going to say radical self-love, because when you love yourself wholly, that's how you can change everything else, around you. So
Definitely working on it. Thank you. And Lana?
I would say compassion and unity. I think we desperately need that. And if we come from a place of compassion, we can really move the milestone.
Thank you. And I will add and say community, that which is going to prevail with empathy. And that is what each one of you has done, giving us your time, your beautiful perspective in helping us drive transgender awareness. This Transgender Awareness Week, as we commemorate those that we have lost, 400 of them around the world to transphobia. And thank you, Google. Thank you, Manish, for having us. And please follow us, parivarbayarea.org. Get involved, turn up for trans lives, and let us build the biggest South Asian queer trans family. Much love to everybody.
Anjali, are you still here?
I am. I'm just
wonderful.
waiting.
I dropped off there for a moment, but I turned off the video recording. Wow, I am just so moved. And
me too. Wow. Like, these are folks that I would love to biggest hug and just tell them how much I love them and for all that they're doing.
We still have Lana and Raj over here. I suppose if you can hear me, I'm deeply, deeply thankful to you for your that time. And Anjali, again, deeply thankful for getting this up and running in just a couple of days. I just feel a lot more reasons to be around the community that you're creating after this conversation, more so than I had before. So thank you for this. It's very, very moving and very, very powerful.
Thank you for being part of the Parivar and helping us continue these kind of conversations. And I think it was really authentic in our sharing, and hopefully activated many folks.
Absolutely. And there will be recording. Abhishek, if you're still here and are able to hear, there will be recording. We will, I don't know when exactly we can get that out, but we will get that out. I think there's some amazing discussion points and amazing perspectives from that recording. As a viewer, y'all probably are not thinking about that. I have a live stream over here because y'all just were having a discussion. I think there were really, really good points made and good perspectives brought, so we can do something with that footage. I'm hoping we can get the footage out to you folks by end of today.
Okay.
But more on that. Yeah, I think I already stopped. Oh, I did not stop it. We'll cut it. Thank you. We'll cut it, and we'll cut the point where I was talking